Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to my latest Top 5 episode. This is the show where I take a topic in progressive rock, usually one that my wife comes up with, and I give the top 5 based on that topic just off the top of my head. It's meant to be more of a off-the-cuff type show, not really well prepared, just me based on my previous prog knowledge coming up with some items to talk about through the show. More of a quick shot episode for you guys to enjoy, and really a springboard for you guys to give your ideas in the comments below. I'm sure you'll have a lot of ideas for this topic today. And as always, subscribe if you haven't yet. I do these shows regularly every Thursday. It's a fun time. A lot of people have been enjoying a lot of the topics, and please always suggest topics if you have any in the comments. That's always appreciated as well. I'm sure my wife especially appreciates that as she comes up with new topics week to week. So for this week, it's the top 5 debut albums of prog artists. The debut album is an interesting thing in prog. I think for a lot of artists, it's them really feeling things out or really stretching their legs. Some bands, I feel like their debut is a little bit removed from the rest of their catalog because they still weren't sure who they were yet. But there's some bands that really came onto the scene and really struck hard with their debut. And this is the debut studio album that the band came up with. I know in some cases maybe a band came out with some other material first in single form or as EPs or something like that. Maybe live tracks or other things, or like a demo or something like that. But really I'm talking about their first major studio release. And so that's really the parameters I'm talking about here. But like I said, some of the big prog bands, I feel like some of their debuts are a bit weaker, and it took them a bit to find their footing, like Genesis, of course, to me, didn't really find their footing until Trespass, which is their second major album. Yes, really for me, the Yes album is where things really took off. Not that their first albums are bad, they really have some great, incredible stuff, but I felt like they didn't really reach the pinnacle of what they would become until really the Yes album shows up on the table. So those were bands I didn't really consider for this list, even though they're such major prog bands. Some honorable mentions before I get into the main meat of my list. Of course, I always have to mention a Neil Morse style project here. Spock's Beard's The Light, I think, is an excellent debut and really showcased Neil Morse's talent and who he was right off the bat. I think that really gives you an idea and sense of who he is as an artist. The Mars Volta have an incredible debut, Deloused in the Comatorium, which many people consider to be their best album. The Tangent, The Music That Died Alone, is a really great, notable debut. I think it's one of their strongest albums and really came out of the gate hot with some incredible symphonic prog from Andy Tillison there. Haken's debut, Aquarius. I know they had some earlier material that came out before this, but their first major release was Aquarius, which, what a record Aquarius is. It's such a strong debut record from them that really showcases their prog tendencies and has so many different things going for it. This grand, big concept record that really hit hard. I also wanted to mention Gentle Giant's self-titled record that I think is a bit underrated. I think they really had a solid debut that really showcased who they were as a band and was a great springboard for what they would become later. So those were some of my honorable mentions. But now getting into the list proper, at number 5 is the self-titled record from Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And maybe this is a bit of a cheat because these are guys coming in who are already well established and have their own projects. You know, this is, like I've mentioned before in the Prog Supergroups Top 5 episode, they're a bit of a supergroup here coming together, so not quite the same as like a fresh, brand new prog group coming out of the gate with this type of album. But that being said, I think it's one of the best debuts of the classic prog era. This has Take a Pebble on it, which is one of my favorite tracks from the band, just so beautiful and really showcases their penchant for great prog sensibilities. There's some really great playing from Keith Emerson, of course. The Three Fates is an incredible track, and it has one of their best singles on it as well with Lucky Man. So it's just a really compact, cool album that really showcases the band's talents right out of the gate. Everyone's featured really well here. And I just think it's a really brilliant album, one of their best in their catalog. So to come out of the gate with one of their best albums, I think is really a notable feat. So I wanted to put them in the makes here. Number 4, I snuck this one in after thinking through this topic a bit more. Maybe an obscure pick, but I wanted to go with Anglagard and their album Hybris. Anglagard was founded in 1991 in Sweden. They have some incredible instrumental prog music. I guess there are some light vocals here, but mostly what's focused on is more of the instrumental work, and they have this really cool tapestry of this symphonic prog that really harkens back to the classic era. Some Gentle Giant, some Jethro Tull, some Yes, all of that thrown into a blender and makes this really satisfying stew of music that is just perfect on this record. It's just every track is really exploratory and fun, and really was one of the big seminal albums that I think led to this new wave of prog that came about in the 90s. This was them really striking out in a way that not many bands were at that time. This was such an exploratory venture. And so I have to give it credit for that, for it being such a leap into uncharted waters, and in doing a style that really wasn't considered popular at the time, and that really catapulted things in a direction that led to the beloved genre we have now. So I wanted to highlight Anglagard's album there. One of their best. They just came out of the gate with an incredible record. Item number 3 on my list is Frost and their album Milliontown. I love this record. It's one of my favorite all-time records, and it still hasn't been topped, in my opinion, by any of the subsequent Frost albums, as good as they all have been. Not saying anything bad about Frost, but they just knocked it out of the park with this release that really almost revolutionized my thinking about the modern prog genre. Maybe that's a bit hyperbolic, but it really brought this more modern aesthetic to my prog taste, which at that point were more retro in style. I was into the Flower Kings and Spocksbeard and any band that sounded similar to the bands of the 70s that my dad was showing me. But I felt like Frost came onto the scene with some of those influences, but doing something a bit more modern and having a pop aesthetic to some of the tracks and vocal works, but also doing these expansive proggy things as well, these really extended soloing and really cool keyboards. And it's just a really beautiful album that just really has a very specific feel to it. To me, it feels like this almost winter style album. I love Hyperventilate. It really starts the gate with a great instrumental that really showcases what the band's all about. Blacklight Machine has always been a favorite track of mine, just totally a cool rock track with a great vibe and a incredible extended soloing section at the end. And Milliontown, the big epic, is just one of my favorite epics of all time. It really runs the gamut between all these different feels, and it flows so well and has so many sections, and just everything is ear candy and beautiful from one moment to the next. It just really blends all these styles that I really was enjoying into this really great package, and is one of my favorite albums of all time. So I had to mention it. And incredible that it's a debut, that they came out of the gate with such an incredible piece of work and a great statement of music. Number 2, I put on the list Marillion, Script for a Jester's Tear. Once again, I think they came out with some singles and stuff before this, but this to me is the first major release by the band, and it's a classic in a lot of senses of the word. It's a neo-prog classic, really was the flagpole for continuing this prog music into the 80s, in a decade that wasn't the popular form of music at the time, and they really planted their flag with one of their strongest efforts here. It's an incredible short statement of music, but it's really, every track is really brilliant. I really love the title track, of course, as it starts. The Web is incredible. Garden Party. I just really love the prog aesthetic. They're taking a lot of cues from like Genesis, but bringing it into a new 80s aesthetic. Fish is really brilliant on this album. His vocals and everything that he's doing really showcase a really fascinating band. And so I thought this was well deserving of a spot here, because for many it's maybe still the best Marillion album. I don't know if I'd quite say that, but I think it's a really strong contender, and I think it's just incredible what they were able to do right out of the gate, considering the landscape of music in this time period, that they were bold enough to come out with something so progressive right off the bat. So I really like that album. And number one, I feel like this is somewhat of a no-brainer perhaps for anyone who's a big lover of progressive rock, but I'm putting King Crimson in the Court of the Crimson King at number one. It really was the beginnings of the prog genre. It's considered by many to be like the first true prog album. Sure, there were albums before it that dabbled in progressive leanings and were really influential to the prog genre to come, but I think this is really where everything exploded, and this is where the prog genre really got its start. And it's just such a statement, a bold statement of music that runs the gamut between a lot of different feels in prog. You know, you have your 21st Century Schizoid Man, which is more of this jazzy, really frenetic paced opening that really sets the mood. But then you've got more of these laid back ballads like I Talk to the Wind. And then you get this big, more exploratory, jazzy improv type thing in the album with Moonchild. And then Court of the Crimson King, you get the big epic symphonic statement at the end that's as epic as it got at that point. And just a really great encapsulation of everything progressive in one album, and really set the stage and really made its mark to what could come forward in the genre. It's not really only a debut album for King Crimson, but really a debut album for all of prog in a way. So I felt like that had to be the king here, the number one spot. So please let me know in the comments how you feel about my list, if you agree with these choices, and let me know your list as well. I'd be fascinated to hear what you guys think about this topic and how you would place your favorite albums, prog debut albums. So thank you guys so much for joining me, and I hope you guys continue enjoying the music. Bye everybody!